Hi everyone, so in the past I have spoken about pole weapons such as spears, poleaxes and such like. And what I really want to focus on in this video is 3 disadvantages to pole weapons. Now, the context to this is that as in the past I've stated very strongly, pole weapons are a main battle weapon and they generally have a great advantage in an unarmoured fight against something like a sword or a mace or a short weapon. Okay, the very fact that you've got a lot of length, and some people seem to be under the misapprehension that if you get inside the point then your job is done. That's not always true, because it's very easy to retract the point to sword length and still fight very, very close with a pole weapon. So they can change length and they can change angle between someone's foot and someone's face very, very quickly. So they're very versatile weapons, and they are, generally speaking, much better in a one-on-one fight than something like a sword is. Okay, but 3 disadvantages I just want to highlight about polearms. Okay, first of all, is the simple fact that they are more perishable in general. And I have mentioned this before in previous videos, more perishable than something like a sword. What I mean by that is they have a long wooden shaft. Okay? Now that long wooden shaft, whilst it is fairly sturdy, and you can't, generally speaking, chop through it with 1 hit, or even with 2 or 3 hits, or several hits, because the thing is not rooted strongly in a vise or in the ground, it's not a branch on a tree, it's being held by a person. When you hit it, it tends to absorb the shock, and it's quite difficult actually to damage these poles. However, it is nevertheless possible, and they do get damaged in use. Perhaps reenactors, for example, maybe have a little bit of an underestimation of how much they get damaged against sharp weapons, because of course they're practicing with blunt weapons. And in HEMA we can't spar, well, we could spar with sharp weapons, but we don't generally spar with sharp weapons. And so again, we don't really factor this into our sparring, the fact that this wooden shaft will get damaged against sharp cutting weapons. Okay, so there's the first big disadvantage of a pole weapon, is essentially the fact that the pole, the bit which gives you the advantage, is more fragile than the shaft of a shorter weapon, or indeed a sword blade. Okay, that's the first disadvantage. Second disadvantage is you cannot, they're not as manoeuvrable, you cannot carry them around everywhere like you can do with a sword or a short sidearm. Okay, so very clearly the reason that weapons like swords, daggers, sort of short swords, falchions, messes, things like this were popular as sidearms is because you can wear them on your side, hence the term sidearm. You can't wear a spear, okay? You can't operate a siege machinery and have a spear hanging around very easily. It would get in the way, where would you put it? People would fall over it, all of that kind of thing. Equally, you can't have a missile weapon, generally speaking, such as a bow or crossbow or a gun, and be operating that, reloading that at optimum efficiency and have one of these as a backup. Instead, your backup is generally a sword or an axe or a warhammer or something like this, something that you can wear easily. Okay, and so there's the first 2 disadvantages. The third disadvantage is that your hands are relatively vulnerable. Okay, now particularly the lead hand. When you're using a sword or a mace or a warhammer or something like this, you're very conscious of protecting your hand. Whenever you attack, or indeed whenever you defend, there is a moment in which the hand is vulnerable. However, with a pole weapon, even if it's a cutting pole weapon or a thrusting pole weapon, this lead hand, whichever lead hand that happens to be, it could be your right hand or your left hand, is vulnerable, especially to cutting weapons. And in fact, this is one of the advised techniques against a person with a bayonet and a musket, or bayonet and rifle, if you have a sword, is to attack the person's lead hand. Not only will this potentially wound them, but even if you miss the hand, it's still doing damage to the shaft of the weapon. But perhaps more importantly than that, if you're attacking the hand, it makes them less likely to go all out offensive on you, because they're going to be worried about their hand. Every time they extend, unless they do this, every time they extend their hand, it's vulnerable. Okay? And connected, a related point to that, is that it's relatively easy, I say relatively easy because it's not easy, but it's relatively easy to grab the shaft of a pole weapon. So if you're using a short weapon and your opponent is attacking you with a spear or a poleaxe or something like this, it's relatively easy to grapple with them, so long as you can get past that point for a second and get close enough, or parry the poleaxe or parry the halberd, and get in close quickly. And that's really the secret to fighting pole weapons, is a good cover and closing as quickly as you can. Pretty much the same tactic against rapiers, incidentally. If you can get in close, then basically sort of 80% of this weapon is very easy to grab hold of. It's not got an edge, it's fairly round and fat, it's not going to hurt your hand, and once you've got a good hold of it, it's very difficult for the opponent to get it back again. Okay, so there are 3 big disadvantages of pole weapons. In actual fact, it's kind of 4 points, but I've wrapped two into one there. So you could say 3 points or 4 points that are strong disadvantages of pole weapons. However, I will reiterate once again that they are, generally speaking, very formidable, and it's not only a question of their physical advantages that they have against something like a sword or an axe or a large knife. Not only their sort of their physical attributes that give them an advantage, but also the fact that generally speaking they are fairly easy to learn to use. So you can shove a spear in the hands of an absolute beginner, and generally speaking they will still be able to give an experienced swordsman quite a lot of trouble. And a lot of the time I would put my money on the beginner with a spear over the average quality or slightly experienced swordsman. Okay? So they do have disadvantages, but they are still pretty awesome. Cheers!